Hey guys, today we're going to continue reading The Great Gatsby, which is a famous modernist novel. And we're going to focus in on what the word modernist means. And we're going to do this mainly by looking at the first 2 pages and just discussing some more general themes of what the word modernism means. It is used to refer to a few decades where you can see certain themes or styles represented repeatedly in literature. There are other literary eras that you may have heard of. Does anyone have any examples? Yeah, Katie?
Romanticism.
Yeah, perfect. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And Romanticism, for example, is associated with nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone else have any ideas of historical or cultural eras that people have used nowadays to give an idea, like looking at the past to see what we can categorize as general characteristics of certain decades? Does anything come to mind? Maybe you've learned it in a history class or an art class. Not necessarily just a literature class. Yeah, Joy?
Renaissance?
Yeah, exactly. The Renaissance is both an era for literature and one for art. So today we're going to focus in on modernism, which comes from the late 19th century, so like the 1880s or even 1870s in some cases, to roughly the 1920s and 1930s. Our book, The Great Gatsby, is from the 1920s, so it's actually on the latter end of that period. It's kind of funny that we call it the modernist era, because most of us associate the word modernist with the present. Can anyone guess what scholars call the present day? Katie?
Postmodernism.
Yeah, exactly. Which is funny, because what's the future going to be? Postmodernism? We'll see. But it makes you think that modernism must have been pretty darn important if nowadays they're still just naming things in relationship to it. So why don't we work together now using a memory device or a chant so that we can remember some characteristics of what we should look for in modernist literature. So one characteristic of modernist literature is frame narration. We're going to do this, frame narration, to talk about times when the narrator might be different than the main character of the story. Another one is that it focuses into the mind. So we're going to go into the mind with our fingers like this. And into the mind means that it's really focused on mental processes or psychology, since Freud came out right around this time and everyone started focusing more on internal processes. Then we have rejection of the status quo, of things like religion or cultural norms. And so to do that, we're going to go like this. Rejection of the status quo, and that's more of a thematic than a structural one. And then finally, we have structural creativity, which means that they might have different grammar or other ways of structuring the text. And for that one, you get to get structurally creative. So dance in any way that you want. So first, all together, frame narration.
Frame narration.
Good. Into the mind.
Into the mind.
Good. Rejection of the status quo.
Rejection of the status quo.
And last, structural creativity.
Structural creativity.
Good. So FIRS is another way that you can remember the first letters of the parts of our chant. So we can't go into all of these elements of modernism today, although over the course of reading the book we'll get into them all. But keep them in mind as artistic decisions that were very consciously on the author's mind as he wrote the text, or sometimes even subconsciously influencing him because of other texts that he has read at that time. We're going to talk about where we can see this even in just the first 2 pages of The Great Gatsby. So go ahead and open up that text. Thanks, Katie. Alright, so let's focus in more on frame than into the other 3, just because we don't have too much time today. So frame narration, what does that sound like that might be about? Any ideas? Think of like a picture frame. Yeah.
Sort of like a story within a story.
Yeah, exactly. So a frame narrator is like when the narrator telling the story is not the main person involved in it, and sometimes that lends a new dimension to the rest of the story. Can any of you think of another story you might have read where there's a frame narrator? Yes, Katie?
Heart of Darkness.
Yeah, Heart of Darkness, which is another typical modernist novel, one of the first, has a frame narrator. And in that one, as well as in this one, the narrator is unreliable. An unreliable narrator can actually help to shape the story because it puts the perspective of another character in contrast with the perspectives of the people within the story. So to finish, let's all together remember the 4 tenets of a modernist novel, especially the one that we focus on today. So, all together, frame narration, into the mind, rejection of the status quo, and structural creativity. Thanks, class. Good job today.